The forgotten workshop. The key stuck in the lock again, just as it had every morning for the past week. Philia Reed jiggled it with practiced patience, her breath forming small clouds in the February air. The brass doorknob of Reed's Restoration and Antiquities had developed a stubborn personality over its 8 decades of service, much like the woman who had turned it every morning before her. "Come on, Grandma's girl," Philia whispered, using her grandmother's old nickname for both the door and herself. "Just one more time." The lock finally surrendered with a satisfying click, and the familiar scent of lemon oil and aged wood welcomed her home. Home. The word still felt strange when applied to this place. After spending 15 years in Boston's competitive art restoration scene, returning to the sleepy coastal town of Port Haven felt like stepping into someone else's life. Yet here she was, inheritor of both her grandmother Eleanor's shop and the mountain of responsibility that came with it. Philia flipped the switches, and warm light flooded the showroom. Dust motes danced in the morning sun streaming through the front windows, catching on the edges of carved frames and the curves of antique furniture. Everything was exactly as Eleanor had left it 3 months ago, down to the half-finished cup of tea on the workbench and the reading glasses perched atop a stack of restoration manuals. She hadn't been able to bring herself to move any of it, not yet. But today was different. The bank's deadline loomed, and she needed to either make this business work or sell to Harrison Development Corporation, who'd been eyeing the historic building for their latest luxury condominium project. Right then, Philia said, shrugging off her coat, "Time to face the music." The workshop behind the showroom had always been her favorite part of the building. As a child, she'd spent countless hours watching her grandmother work, transforming damaged pieces into treasures. Eleanor's hands had seemed magical, coaxing beauty from beneath layers of neglect and time. Philia pulled on a pair of work gloves and began sorting through the clutter. Each shelf held fragments of her grandmother's life: jars of specialized varnishes, hand-carved tools, notebooks filled with restoration techniques passed down through generations. She worked methodically, cataloging items that could be sold and those essential for continuing the business. The afternoon sun had begun to fade when her gloves caught on something beneath an old dropcloth. Pushing aside decades of accumulated supplies, Philia revealed a wooden chest she'd never seen before. It was small, about the size of a bread box, but exquisitely crafted from dark walnut with inlaid marquetry depicting intertwining vines and flowers. "How did I never notice you?" she murmured, running her fingers over the smooth surface. The craftsmanship was extraordinary, far beyond anything she'd seen in her grandmother's collection. A small brass plate on the lid bore an unfamiliar symbol. A compass rose with a paintbrush crossed with a carpenter's square at its center. The lock was unusual too, not the simple mechanism she'd expected, but an intricate puzzle of sliding panels. Philia's restoration training kicked in as she examined it. 18th century, maybe earlier, she noted. European craftsmanship, but there's something different about the design. It took her nearly an hour to solve the puzzle lock, each correct movement rewarded with a satisfying click until the final piece slid into place. The lid opened smoothly on well-oiled hinges, revealing contents that made her breath catch. Inside, nestled in burgundy velvet, lay an assortment of items that seemed carefully chosen. A small leather-bound journal with Eleanor's familiar handwriting, several fascinating tools she'd never seen before, and most intriguingly, what appeared to be unfinished pieces of an elaborate wooden sculpture. The journal's first entry was dated just 6 months ago. "My dearest Philia, if you're reading this, then you've already taken the first step. The chest found you, just as it found me when I was ready. There's so much I should have told you about our family's true heritage, about the guild and the responsibility we carry. But some things can't be told. They must be discovered. The pieces in this chest are part of something larger than either of us. Each one holds a story, a secret, and a challenge. Complete what I could not, and you'll understand why this shop, this town, and the gift we possess are so much more important than I ever let on. Trust your hands, trust your heart, And above all, trust the wood. It will speak to you, as it has spoken to the women in our family for generations. All my love. Eleanor. P.S. Whatever you do, don't let Harrison Development get their hands on these pieces. Some things are worth more than money, and some gifts can never be bought. Thalia sat back on her heels, the journal clutched to her chest. Questions tumbled through her mind. What was the guild? What gifts was Eleanor talking about? And why had her grandmother kept all of this secret? A loud knock at the shop's front door startled her from her thoughts. Through the workshop window, she could see an expensive car parked outside, its headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. A tall figure stood at the entrance, the distinctive silhouette of Richard Harrison himself. Thalia quickly closed the chest and slid it back under the dropcloth. Her grandmother's warning echoed in her mind as she stood, brushing dust from her jeans. Whatever secrets the chest held, whatever mystery Eleanor had left for her to solve, one thing was clear: the game was about to change. She straightened her shoulders and headed for the front door, her grandmother's final words burning in her mind. Some things were indeed worth more than money. She just had to figure out what they were. The Master's Challenge. Richard Harrison's polished appearance seemed out of place among the lovingly worn antiques of Reed's restoration. His tailored suit probably cost more than a month of Thalia's rent, and his smile held all the warmth of a December frost. "Miss Reed," he said, extending a manicured hand, "I trust you've had time to consider our offer." "Mr. Harrison." Thalia shook his hand briefly, conscious of the sawdust still clinging to her clothes. "I wasn't expecting you until next week." Plans change. He moved through the showroom like a curator assessing a collection, but his eyes held none of the reverence her grandmother's customers usually showed. "The board has expressed interest in fast-tracking the Harbor View project. We're prepared to increase our offer by 15% if you can close by the end of the month." The amount he named made Thalia's throat tight. It would solve all her financial problems and then some. But the weight of the journal in her back pocket seemed to grow heavier with each word. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Harrison, but I'm still reviewing my options." His smile thinned. "Options? Miss Reed, let's be realistic. This building needs extensive repairs. The business hasn't shown a profit in 3 years. The only option that makes sense is to sell while the offer's still on the table." Before Thalia could respond, the shop's bell chimed again. A man about her age entered, carrying a leather messenger bag and a stack of books. His tweed jacket had seen better days, and his wire-rimmed glasses sat slightly askew on his nose. "I'm sorry," he said, taking in the scene. "I can come back later." "No," Thalia said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Mr. Harrison was just leaving. Harrison's eyes narrowed slightly. "Think about what I said, Miss Reed. Time is a luxury you may not have much of." With a curt nod, he strode out, leaving the scent of expensive cologne in his wake. The newcomer watched him go. "Richard Harrison," he mused. "I suppose he's still trying to buy up the whole historic district. You know him? Professor Samuel Bennett." He shifted his books to offer his hand. "I'm with the history department at Port Haven University. And yes, I know Harrison's work. He's been systematically acquiring properties along the harbor for the past 5 years. Thalia gestured to the small sitting area where her grandmother used to serve tea to special clients. "What brings a history professor to a restoration shop?" "Actually, your grandmother." He set his books down carefully. "She was helping me research something before she..." He paused. "Well, she was supposed to meet with me about some documents I found in the university archives. They mentioned a group called the Artisans Guild of Port Haven." Thalia's hand instinctively touched the journal in her pocket. "The Guild. What kind of documents?" Samuel pulled out a leather folder. "Ship manifests, letters, town records from the 1700s. They all reference a guild of craftsmen who were instrumental in building Port Haven. But here's the interesting part. They weren't just builders. They were artists, innovators. Some accounts even suggest they had abilities that went beyond ordinary craftsmanship." He spread several photocopied pages on the table. Thalia leaned forward, recognizing a familiar symbol in the margins. The same compass rose and crossed tools from the chest. "This is going to sound strange," Samuel continued, "but according to these records, the guild members could create objects that were more than just beautiful. They made things that could solve problems, heal rifts in the community, even protect the town itself. Like magical objects." Thalia tried to keep her voice neutral, even as her mind raced to the mysterious pieces in her grandmother's chest. More like artifacts of extraordinary craftsmanship combined with deep understanding of human nature. He adjusted his glasses. "Your grandmother seemed quite interested when I first mentioned it. She was going to show me something, but then, would you like some tea?" Thalia found herself saying, I think there's something you should see." Over the next hour, they pored over Eleanor's journal together. Samuel's historical knowledge provided context for the cryptic references, while Thalia's restoration expertise helped them understand the technical aspects of the unfinished pieces. "Look at this passage," Samuel said, pointing to a page. "The true gift lies not in the object itself, but in the understanding it creates. Your grandmother seemed to believe these pieces were meant to be completed in a specific way, to serve a specific purpose. But why leave them unfinished?" Thalia wondered aloud. "And why all the secrecy?" A loud crack from outside made them both jump. Through the window, they could see several men in construction gear examining the building's foundation. One was taking photographs. "Harrison's not waiting for your answer," Samuel observed grimly. "He's already planning the demolition." Thalia felt a surge of anger. "He can't do that. I haven't agreed to sell." "No, but he can make it difficult for you to keep operating. The historic district's building codes are complex. If he can prove the structure's unsafe, then he can force a sale through the city council." Thalia finished. She stood abruptly. "I need your help, Professor Bennett." "Sam, please." "Sam, these pieces my grandmother left. I think they're important, not just to me or the shop, but to the whole town. Will you help me figure out what they're meant to be?" He smiled, and for the first time since returning to Port Haven, Thalia felt like she wasn't facing this challenge alone. "Where do we start?" She retrieved the chest from the workshop and carefully laid out its contents. Among the pieces was what appeared to be part of a frame, its wooden surface carved with half-finished patterns that seemed to shift in the light. "We start with this," she said, running her fingers along the grain. "My grandmother always said every piece of wood has a story to tell. It's time we found out what this one's trying to say." As if in response, the wood seemed to warm beneath her touch, and in that moment, Thalia could have sworn she heard her grandmother's voice. "Trust your hands, trust your heart." She picked up one of the strange tools from the chest. "Let's see what you have to teach us." Outside, Harrison's men continued their inspection, unaware that within the old shop's walls, something extraordinary was beginning to take shape, something that would challenge not just their plans, but their entire understanding of what makes a gift truly precious. The hidden pattern. For 3 days, Thalia and Sam worked almost nonstop, piecing together the puzzle Eleanor had left them. The workshop became their sanctuary, filled with notes, historical documents, and carefully arranged wooden pieces that seemed to gain new meaning with each discovery. "Look at this," Sam said, pointing to a faded photograph he'd found in the university archives. "Port Haven, 1876. See that building in the town square?" Thalia leaned closer. The black and white image showed a gazebo-like structure, its wooden frame carved with intricate patterns that tickled something in her memory. She quickly pulled out the partially completed frame from Eleanor's chest. "The patterns match," she breathed. "But the original structure, what happened to it?" "Burned in the Great Fire of 1892, Sam replied, "along with most of the original harbor district. But here's where it gets interesting." He shuffled through his notes. According to town records, that structure was called the Heart of Haven. It was said to be a gift from the guild to the town, a place where disputes were settled and celebrations were held. Some accounts say no one could speak falsely while standing beneath its roof. Philia ran her fingers along the unfinished carvings. And you think my grandmother was trying to recreate it? Not recreate, reimagine. Look at her notes. She wrote about adapting the old ways for modern needs. I think she understood something about how these pieces worked. A loud drilling sound from outside interrupted them. Harrison's inspection team had grown to include heavy equipment, the noise a constant reminder of the threat to the building. Philia stood, stretching her stiff muscles. As she moved to the window, something caught her eye. A pattern in the wooden floor she'd never noticed before. Kneeling, she traced the inlaid design with her finger. "Sam," she called, "look at this." The floor pattern, nearly invisible unless viewed from the right angle, matched a motif from Eleanor's journal. But it wasn't just in the workshop. As they began looking, they found similar marks throughout the building. Subtle wooden inlays, carved details in door frames, even in the shape of old repair work. "It's a map," Sam realized, sketching the patterns. "Your grandmother didn't just own this shop. She was marking places connected to the guild's history." As the sun set, they followed the trail of wooden markers through Port Haven's historic district. Each location held a piece of town history. The old courthouse with its hand-carved witness stand, the library's reading room with its mysteriously acoustic ceiling, the community center's meditation garden with its perfectly proportioned pergola. "These aren't just buildings," Philia said softly. "They're gifts, pieces of craftsmanship that bring people together, that serve the community in ways they don't even realize." Back in the workshop, they spread out their findings. The pieces in Eleanor's chest weren't random. They were meant to be part of something larger, something that would tie all these locations together. But as Philia studied the unfinished wood, she felt something was still missing. Her grandmother's last project wasn't just about preserving the past. It was about creating something new, something Port Haven needed now. As if answering her thoughts, a final page fell from Eleanor's journal, a sketch of what the completed piece should look like. Philia's heart raced as she realized what her grandmother had envisioned. "This isn't just art," she whispered. "It's an answer." Outside, the machines fell silent as night settled over Port Haven. But inside the workshop, Philia and Sam had found something that would change everything if they could complete it in time. The collector's truth. Richard Harrison's true nature revealed itself on a rainy Thursday morning, 1 week before the city council's vote on the historic district's future. "Miss Reed," his voice crackled through the phone. "My team has identified several code violations in your building. Unless they're addressed immediately, at significant expense, I'll have no choice but to report them." "That's why you've been photographing the building," Philia replied. "You're not planning to preserve anything, are you? This is about forcing a sale. Business is business." "But," he paused, "there might be another option. My sources tell me you've been researching the old Artisans Guild. Perhaps we could help each other." After she hung up, Sam looked at her questioningly. What did he want? The Guild's secrets. He knows about them. That's why he's buying up the historic properties. He's looking for something specific. They returned to their research with renewed urgency. As they dug deeper into Harrison's business dealings, a pattern emerged. Every property he'd acquired had some connection to the original guild, and in each one, renovations had gone far beyond normal improvements, as if he were searching for something hidden. Here, Sam pointed to a news article. Harrison's family has been in Port Haven for generations. His great-grandfather was a guild member, but according to these records, he was expelled. They called it a betrayal of the gift. Things moved quickly after that. Through old documents and Eleanor's notes, they discovered the truth. The guild hadn't just been about craftsmanship, it was about responsibility. Each piece they created was meant to serve the community, to bring people together, to solve problems that money and power couldn't fix. Harrison's great-grandfather had tried to use guild secrets for personal gain. When they stopped him, he'd vowed his family would one day control all of Port Haven. Now, 4 generations later, his descendant was close to succeeding. But Eleanor had seen it coming. Her final project wasn't just art, it was protection, a way to preserve what mattered most about Port Haven. And she'd left Thalia everything needed to complete it. Working through the night, Thalia's hands seemed to know what to do. The wooden pieces came together in ways that defied conventional joinery. Patterns emerged that seemed to shift and flow like living things. When she hesitated, she could almost feel her grandmother's guidance. Dawn was breaking when Harrison burst into the workshop, flanked by lawyers and construction crews, but he was too late. The Heart's creation. The completed piece stood in the workshop's center, a wooden arch that seemed to glow with inner light. Its surface told Port Haven's story through carved scenes and patterns that somehow caught every eye differently, showing each viewer what they needed to see. Harrison stopped short. "That's it," he breathed. "The Guild's masterwork. My great-grandfather's notes said it was never finished." "It wasn't," Thalia said quietly, "until now." Over the next hour, as sunlight filled the workshop, something remarkable happened. People began arriving. First a few, then dozens. Word spread through Port Haven that something was happening at Reed's restoration. The arch seemed to draw them in, its pattern speaking to each person differently. As they gathered, stories began to flow. People who'd lived as neighbors for years really talked for the first time. Old grievances were aired and resolved. New connections were made. Harrison watched, his expression changing as the arch's patterns shifted before him. He saw his great-grandfather's anger, his family's generations-long quest for control. But he also saw what it had cost them, and the town. "This is what the Guild was really about," Sam explained gently. "Not power or secrets, but bringing people together. Every piece they created was a gift to strengthen the community." The city council meeting that afternoon was unlike any before. With the arch temporarily installed in the chamber, the truth became clear to everyone. The historic district wasn't just old buildings, it was the heart of Port Haven's identity. Harrison Development withdrew their proposals. Richard Harrison himself, changed by what he'd seen, established a fund for maintaining historic properties. The old shops and buildings would be preserved, but more importantly, their purpose was renewed. Thalia hung Eleanor's final note in the workshop window. "The greatest gift isn't in the wood or the craft, but in what they inspire in others. Every piece we create is a bridge between hearts, a reminder that we're all connected. That's the true legacy of the Guild, and it belongs to everyone." Reed's restoration became more than a shop. Like the Guild pieces of old, it was a place where the community came together, where stories were shared, where problems found solutions. The arch remained in the workshop, its patterns ever-changing, reminding visitors that some gifts can't be bought or sold, they can only be discovered together. And on quiet evenings, when sunset light played across the wooden surfaces, Thalia sometimes felt her grandmother's presence. Eleanor had given her more than a shop or a legacy. She'd given her the greatest gift of all. The knowledge that true craftsmanship isn't just about working with wood, but about building connections that last beyond a lifetime. Port Haven had rediscovered its heart, and in doing so, had given Thalia hers.